6, FPA 1, Side A. We're talking about preacher, sanctity of his home. And that wife meets him at the door with today's problems, the problems of the children, problems with the church, emergency phone calls. And sometimes they're unavoidable. She's got to communicate to him the minute he arrives, a situation that has to be handled. The wife, you need to make that the most pleasant place that that man ever sees. He walks through the door, he's greeted with warmth, with a smile, and you've had your day, but he's had his, so let's both of us just take a few minutes to enjoy ourselves. And you may have a list that in half an hour or so that you're going to say, now I've got to read you the list. Here it is. But he knows that there's been that warmth, that refuge. Every man needs some private time. There's something about going fishing with the fellows. It's not that he doesn't love his wife or cherish the time with her. There's just time when men like to do things, game of ball, something of that nature that they can just kind of relate and they kind of get away from it all. And it's not they don't love their wife. They do indeed. But they've got to have just a little bit of liberty, a little bit of time, free time. I think every wife should understand that she needs some time. She can appreciate being back with her husband. She does the shopping. She takes the children somewhere. She does something on her own. Wives, your husbands need a refuge. Husbands, your wife needs to be involved. She needs to be more than just a support of you. She is indeed that. But she has to have self-worth, and you should get her involved and be a part of what your church is and what your church is doing. And since we have different personalities in our wives, I won't be too explicit on what they should do. Some do more and some less. But you're still a leader, and you should have your wife involved. Let me mention a little item in relation to the preacher's children. I've heard it said that the pastor should keep all bad news, church troubles from their children. They should not dump that heavy load on their children. And I understand that theoretically that is a beautiful goal and concept. But back to the real world, I have found that quite often my children know what's going on before I do. And so when I try to act like some things are not happening, they think that daddy's kind of naive or dumb or both. And yet at the same time, I don't share all the problems, and there are confidential things that I don't share with my children, but they're part of the ministry, and they feel more comfortable if they are a part, and you take them in. Let them be involved. Let them participate in the church. Let them do something, because they take the burden and the criticism. They might as well enjoy a little of the leadership area of it. A little saying that I hope has meaning to you. Churches are exempt, are tax exempt. Preachers are not tax exempt. And IRS is becoming ever more diligent in examining the financial records of a preacher. Simply because our church is tax exempt, we're not. And they're examining books, they're examining records, and more we hear preachers that are in difficulty with IRS because of negligence more than dishonesty. But if you do something carelessly, negligently, even ignorantly, you still are responsible. They want you to pay your share of the taxes. We might as well be diligent with our money. One of every 4 verses in Matthew, Mark, and Luke have to do with money. 1 out of every 6 verses in the New Testament deals with money and or covetousness. And remember the very fundamental cause of sin, the love of money. Not money, but the love of money. Some poor people love money as much as some rich people. The love of money is the root of all evil. And so it is that we have to be very conscious of money. It can undermine everything we're doing. In fact, the perceived mismanagement of funds on a preacher's part can cause a lack of confidence and trust in his church, his community. So pay the taxes that you owe. Pay them up. Cut your spending a little bit. Cut down your lifestyle a little. Go out and produce a little more. But whatever else, pay the money that you owe. A few of the bad money habits that we can get into is we buy unneeded things. We see something, I want that, and so I'm going to go in debt and buy it. We do impulsive buying. Just at the whim of an impulse, we go in debt or we buy something. And I've already mentioned earlier a budget, but I feel it's so important that I do mention it again just briefly. Everyone needs a written budget. That way you know where you're going. And I'm not going to give you the budget, but get you budget book, some kind of financial planning book, and you can get a lot of assistance there. I would throw in one thing. In the planning of a person's budget, it's called miscellaneous. You have your rent, your food, etc., but they have miscellaneous. I like, in the different times that I have given instructions in family budget planning, I have called it junk money, junk budget, because miscellaneous sounds so dignified, and yet quite often we take that miscellaneous and we spend it on things that we're not going to put in the church bulletin. I mean, it's not anybody's business. We just wanted to do it. But if you've got a few dollars designated for junk money, and then you have this impulse, you and your wife want to buy that vase over there that you have no need of, don't even know why you buy it, but you want to buy it. You've always wanted a vase like that. There's no place, but you want to buy it. Then you can look at each other and smile because you have budgeted money and you're able to do a few of those little things without that overwhelming feeling of guilt and irresponsibility. You planned it in there. So avoid those impulsive purchases, work a budget, and don't buy a bunch of stuff you don't need. There's a question that I've heard so frequently in family seminars that it seems to have a lot of legitimacy and meaning. And maybe even as I give you the question, you'll think, hey, that's a good question, and I've heard it before, and it's something we've examined. Let me ask it. Whom should I place first? My wife, my children, or my church? What's the priority of a preacher? His wife, his children, or his church? Who comes first? And that sounds like such a legitimate question on the surface. But having taken a hammer and pounded it and beaten and dug into it until I believe now I understand what the question is asking. And I don't think it's even a legitimate question, because there is no answer to this question. There are times of the day that my wife gets 100% of my attention. There are times when my children get 100% of my attention. And there are times when my church gets 100% of my attention. And there are times in all three of these relationships that a commitment made to one or the other will have to be broken because of an obligation to another. If I'm making a trip with my family, a vacation, but there's a death, a tragedy, I will postpone my vacation. And my church will get first attention because of the urgency. If I am supposed to be preaching Sunday night and my wife is in an automobile accident and I must rush her to the hospital, my church will take a back seat at that time. My wife deserves all of my attention. I will miss that church service without one guilt feeling. And I think that my congregation would recommend that I had missed that service and be by the side of my wife. There are times when I'm in revival and something happens with my child, and the situation of the hour demands that I give my children all my attention at that time. It is important that we give these people we love our attention. And we do not have to sacrifice one just merely so we can accommodate the other. When I see a preacher that is so devoted to his call that he becomes inconsiderate and abusive to his wife, and later that wife leaves him, the wife is wrong, but it was the man that drove her to this temptation to leave him. When he married her, he pledged to her himself, and he owes a part of himself to her. And she has some rights to his time and attention, his love and affection. And no matter how important the work of God is, you've got to keep your marriage strong and solid. There's times when you need to give her flowers. There's times when you need to give her attention, and just give her all of you. You can't give all of yourself to God and expect your family to be strong. I've seen the pastor that neglected his children because of that divine commitment to God. And I'm not belittling our obligation as servants of Jesus Christ, but I do know as a parent we have an obligation. I almost wept as I took a young man fishing with me one day, and this was a preacher's boy. And he caught a fish, and he turned to me beaming. He said, this is the first fish I have ever caught in my life. And I began to question him, and I found that his dad was so committed to the ministry that he had never played ball, he'd never been on a picnic, he'd never been fishing with his boy, but always put it off. Well, right now I'm too busy, later. But the boy grew up, and now he admits the memories and that fondness of that dad that are gone now. There's no way to replace them. My oldest son told me one day after we were in Boston, he said, Dad, he said, some of the most pleasant memories of my life are those days when you took me and the family and we went to the strip pits in southeastern Kansas, and there we camped out all week. And we fished, and we just roughed it. I mean, in a tent, and just roughed it. And he said, sometimes I wish I could just go back. And he said, I know that it's more than just going to the pits fishing. He said, it's to be a child again and to be carefree and have a dad that cares so much. And it is important. If we're going to preach the gospel to win the lost, let's at least win those most precious possessions ever entrusted into our keeping, our own family. Let's win them to the gospel. Let's don't sacrifice them and let them become bitter because they have no father or mother that loves them. We can be an effective preacher and a good dad and a good husband, and we can teach our kids to fish. Now, if you haven't got the message now, I believe that every preacher's been called to be a fisherman, and we need to do a little of that. It can be almost as spiritual to clean the bathroom of the church as it is to shout hallelujah when the preacher's preaching. Now, I touched a while ago, earlier in this series, on the building, the foyer, the yard. And I left the bathrooms for a little special attention because invariably the bathroom can be ignored. The church congregation can accommodate themselves at home, come to church, and never go into the bathroom and go home, and they don't have to endure whatever endurance is required to use the bathroom at the church. But a visitor comes, and they're not advised. They don't realize they should have taken care of all their personal business before they arrived at the church, and they're there, and they say, where's the powder room? Where's the men's room? And you point off in the direction, say, follow your nose, you'll find it. And they go, and sure enough, it's just as described. So, you see, they have such a negative opinion of this church. And if some saint would come to church early, when they're in scrub, mop, clean, maybe come a day early, and paint and fix up and bring some freshener and decorate and see that it's furnished well, then when that visitor goes in there, there's a good feeling, and it will carry over. It will just have a profound effect upon this person, and that's exactly what you want. Now, I'm not going to deal with counseling in its entirety, in an exhaustive sense, but there are two segments of counseling that I think a young man needs to grasp from day one, and so I will comment on those. Number one is so simple, and yet it's such a threat to destroy. A young man, no man, should ever counsel a lady alone, no matter what your integrity is. And though the first 9 ladies you counsel alone are full of integrity, there are those suspicious-minded people that see you go into that closed room with her and stay for an hour, and then when the counseling is over, you're leaving. And though your integrity is beyond question, yet this person takes the liberty to question it, and you have exposed yourself to a lot of imagination and evil surmisings. Not only that, the 10th lady that goes into that room, and I don't know what makes this happen, but preachers and doctors and lawyers are subject to the infatuation of the fair sex. And they see us as some kind of bigger-than-life individuals, dominant leadership, strong, and they somehow have a tendency to, a few of them, on occasion. I've read this now. I haven't had all that much problem. Maybe the looks has something to do with it. But I've even seen ugly folks that have women who have thrown themselves at them. And so you can be in this room and you can be counseling in all integrity and sincerity before God, appropriate and above reproach. And you and she and God knows when she leaves, she has the opportunity to tell something that's not true, and you have no defense whatsoever. None. And you set yourself up. You did not have to be in that situation. Brother Stanford, I just had to talk to her. Stand out in the open. Well, she wanted to go in private. Get your wife. Well, Brother Stanford, my wife was homesick. Then say, I'll make an appointment with you next week. Or let me get Deacon Smith and his wife and the three of us. Your reputation, your ministry is too important to counsel a woman alone. A second point of counseling is so easy to fall into. The error is just so easy. The most dangerous job that a police officer has is a domestic quarrel. When the neighbors call and say that the Smiths are fighting, and it sounds like they're about to kill each other and the policemen come, they dread it because Mr. and Miss Smith may be beating on each other and hacking each other with knives or threatening to shoot each other. And so when the officer comes in and he has to physically restrain Mr. Smith to protect poor Mrs. Smith, and suddenly she sees this big, violent, strong, uniformed, armed officer grabbing her husband and physically restraining him, she becomes hysterical, and she takes the gun that she was going to kill her husband with, and she blows away the policeman. Because that's her lover. They may be courting, but that's her lover. Lovers love to quarrel. And it's not unusual for someone to go through physical abuse and then ask for more. So officers understand the fickle position of a distraught wife or husband. Now, what happens is a man and a wife gets in a quarrel. And let's just assume that the man is 100% wrong. And the wife comes to the pastor for counseling and comfort. And she tells the way her husband has thrown their money away and not worked on the job as he should, and how he's been unfaithful, and how he lies and he lays around drunk and all of these things. And the preacher says, boy, your husband is really a problem. And indeed he may be. But now the wife has new ammunition in her next battle. The next time she gets into a discussion with her husband, she says to him, well, even the preacher says you're a problem. And if she's a person of real integrity and an excellent memory, she will only repeat what you said. But quite often, their memory fails them, and they repeat what they thought you meant. And they'll say, the preacher says you're a worthless bum. And maybe you didn't say that, but when you will talk to one party of a conflict without the other one present, you have opened yourself for real grief and sorrow. Besides, when you listen to one side of an argument, you're only going to hear their side, and they're going to make it as convincing and persuasive as possible. And so when they get through, the only side you can take is theirs. And you're not left with any choice. So when someone comes to you and says, I've got a problem with my husband, my wife, my brother, somebody in the church, look at them and smile and say, I am extremely concerned about this, and I want to assist in every way possible. I'll tell you what let's do. Now, when can I get with you? Oh, you want to talk right now? Okay, well, let's call the other person and let's get them here so that, they can hear what you say, and they will have an opportunity, and then what you don't say, but what you mean is, because I want them to hear what I say. I don't want you to go to them with what I say. I want them to hear what is said and what I react to, because I don't want to get in the middle of this. And so if you feel comfortable in counseling in this situation, make sure that you get both the defendant and the plaintiff before the jury, before you start your case, your hearing, because otherwise you'll find yourself in the middle of something that you're not really in. They'll just put you there to try to protect themselves. When someone does you a favor, brings you a cake at your birthday, they buy you a gift when they went to Mexico, the gift may be inexpensive and inappropriate for the decor of your home. That's irrelevant. When they do something for you, send them a thank you card, fairly punctually. Don't let it be months in doing. Christmas time, you get 8 or 10 little gifts. When you get those, learn early to go home and write down who gave you what, so that when Christmas is over, you can sit down and send out thank you cards for everything that you've received. The people in the church will say they have a tremendous pastor. It's important that you send out thank you notes for everything that you receive. When you are invited to preach, at another church, and you are the guest speaker. After the conversation on the telephone, the invitation to go, it's important that you sit down at the typewriter, type a letter, and you need to give the preacher several pieces of information. Number one, you need to tell them how you're traveling. If you're driving, then they know they don't have to pick you up at the airport. If you're flying, they know they have to pick you up at the airport. If you're going to fly, they need to know the airline, the flight number, and the time of arrival. If you're driving, they need to know what time you will arrive. They need to know if you will be coming alone or is your wife and 22 children coming. And that way, if you're going to arrive at 4:30 and your wife and 23 children will be along, the preacher's wife will be notified that she has quite a supper to prepare for you and your family. And if you're going to be leaving in the morning, you write, I will be driving, I will be bringing a bus with my 23 children and my wife, and we will be spending the night leaving early the next morning because we have an appointment back in the city. That way, you've given them the information. They know what time you'll arrive, how many to feed, how many they're going to have to put up that night, and when you're leaving. And so they have all that information. They need it in writing. And if your invitation is several months before the occasion, then you can just leave the writing of the letter for a little while. But several weeks before the occasion of your going to their city to preach, you need to communicate with them in writing all of this information. Now, I realize that there are 4 or 5 preachers in the world that don't read all their mail. I showed up at a city. I called the pastor, and I said, I'm in town. Oh, well, good, Brother Stanford. What you doing here? I said, well, I'm here to preach for you tonight. Oh, really? He said, are you sure it's this week? And I said, yes, sir. This is the date that we agreed upon. And he said, come on over. He said, I forgot, but he said, I thought it was next week you were coming. But anyway, he said, we have church tonight, so everything will work out all right. So I went to his church and went into his office where he was, and we were sitting there chatting. He said, Brother Stanford, he said, you didn't write me. He said, I never did receive a letter. I said, yes, brother, I did write you. I know I did, and I sent it first class, and it didn't come back. And about that time, I looked over at the corner of his desk, and he noticed me looking at it, and there was a stack of mail no less than 4 inches high. Now, this wasn't advertisements as such and brochures. It looked like most of it was first-class mail, envelopes of that size that was stacked up there at least 4 inches high. And he said, well, he said, I've been gone a lot lately. And he said, I've kind of let my mail pile up, Brother Stanford. He said, let me look and see. And so he started flipping through the mail, and sure enough, there was my letter addressed to him, unopened, and it was on his desk, and the date and everything was in there. So even if you write a letter, it won't always work out perfect, but at least you should do your part and let them know. Then when it's over, you go home. When you arrive home, you need to sit down and write a personal thank you to that preacher, thanking him for his hospitality, for the opportunity to preach in his church, for the offering received, for the food that was provided, and anything else that he did. You should mention it and express your appreciation for all of those things. To be an effective preacher, among many other things, you will learn that you can't do everything. The more things that you must do, the smaller your congregation will be, because one person can only do so much. Therefore, it is important that you learn to delegate. Many of us have delegated and anticipated a job to be well done, only to find that it's not done. So to effectively delegate, you must include in there accountability. If you ask someone to organize a committee to plan for the Christmas festivities of your church this year, you should tell them, now this is September the 24th, and you 3 people are going to make up a committee, and I will expect to meet with you October the 4th at 4:30 Saturday afternoon at my office. And write it on a calendar and write it down and hand it to them. Now you're covered, because they will procrastinate. They have other activities, wives, children, jobs, fishing, hunting, yards to mow, etc. And they're going to have colds, flus, pneumonia, and so they're going to be preoccupied with their life, and they will procrastinate, which means that they have the responsibility and their intentions are good, but they're going to put it off from day to day to day to day until suddenly one day you realize it's too late now, we can't get on with it. So if you will put accountability with delegation, responsibility and accountability, one's not complete without the other. Now then, you have a date. On Friday, you Friday evening, you call the chairman of this committee. You say, I am prepared to meet with you folks tomorrow afternoon at 4:30 in my office. I'm looking for a written report. Oh, you want it written? Well, yes, I wanted it written. I did ask you that. Well, yeah, I believe you did. Okay. All right. See, so they still have enough time to write down the plans that they have made. If they have made them, and if they haven't made them, they're going to get on the phone and call these other committee members. We've got to get together right now. We've got to give a written report to our pastor tomorrow at 4:30, and they'll get together. And when they come in, it will be at least partially done and maybe very ably done. But if you don't have accountability, nothing. When you ask someone in your church to visit an absentee, then what you need to do is give them a written notice. Here's the address. And then at the bottom of it, I will expect a phone call at my home telling me what the results of your visit to them will be. And they know that there's accountability. Now they can't, just ignore it forever and it'll go away. They have a responsibility. When you delegate someone, just expect it. The first time you ask someone to do something, they're going to goof up. They're going to mess up some way. I don't know how they do it. They just do it. And so you just, you prepare for it. Ask them to do something. They do poorly. But ask them again. And in a little while, they'll learn your methods and the rhythm of your madness. And they will become real good, able assistants to you. The man who thinks he is a failure because he does not see the immediate results that he has desired is foolish. You've heard this. Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes a long time to grow a tree. You can grow a weed in just a few weeks. Just very few weeks you can grow a weed. But if you want to grow a meaningful tree, a big redwood, a big acorn tree, something of that nature, it's going to be a long time in the doing. You just don't do something meaningful overnight. When you first start preaching, you're not as effective as you'll become. You'll sharpen the edge. You will work out some deficiencies. You'll become more positive. I had a friend who was a missionary, and he was there only a short while, and the government changed, and they were asked to leave. He returned home very depressed and despondent, discouraged and feeling a failure, and like as if he could control that government of that country. But anyway, eventually he gave up his life, and he was gone in defeat, only to find out that later that what little they had done, the seed they had sowed, had germinated and produced and reproduced, and this country had a great revival, but he could not enjoy the fruits of his labor because he had looked at things in a very shallow and meaningless manner, and he felt a failure. The only way that I'll be a failure is that I quit trying. If I labor to the end, endure to the end, if I can hear my Father say, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant," then I am not a failure. The side of this tape is complete. You may turn the tape over now. Thank you. FPA 1, tape 6, side B. It's easy to become inspired, get in the pulpit, go to preaching on soul winning, talk about fasting 3 days a week, praying, handing out tracts, knocking on 32 doors a day, etc. And all of those are commendable goals. I found that for me to effectively communicate and to lead, if I want to establish a program of visitation or commitment, that if I will outline the guidelines concerning that, and then I will go do it. If I'm going to preach Sunday night, I would like for everybody to make 32 house calls a day or 32 house calls a week, 40 on Saturday, whatever it is I'm going to set up as something that they should do. I try to go do it the preceding week and make sure that my goals are realistic and that I have done them myself. And then it's easy to tell your people this is what you'd like for them to do and that you've tried it and this has been the result. If you keep an accurate calendar, it will benefit you. You need to know what your appointments are and things that will be expected of you, and then you can follow through on it. I want to talk a little bit about the preacher and his family. Your past family, your mother, your father, your sisters and brothers, etc. You need to give a little attention to keeping those fences mended and good communication. Remember birthdays and presents. Your wife's family becomes an extension of your family. They have loved her and cared for her, and they need time and attention. But most of all, your present family. is an area that you need to deal with. For your attitude towards your family will manifest itself and will have an effect upon your entire ministry. You have to keep private time for your family. There's times you have to be together and do things just you and your family. You are not her Lord. He is both of your Lord. Your co-workers, she's a helpmeet, and you two are one. You should involve your children in your ministry and let them become a part of everything that you do as far as possible. Your wife should become your very best friend. Not only should you love her, you should learn to like her. And you should learn to communicate with her and involve her, affect her in all of your ministry. Let her be a part of it. They are the example for one half of your congregation. In some instances, 2/3 of the congregation will be ladies. And your wife is the prime example of a Christian to them. How she dresses, how she talks, how she behaves herself, her commitment to God will affect your ministry and enhance it immensely. And so if you keep her spiritually strong, emotionally up, then it will be a blessing. You're both public figures, and you need to conduct yourself as a public figure because people will be looking at you. The minister is usually more visible and certainly more audible. He has the opportunity to preach, but your wife is a very strong part of your ministry. Wives, let me say that your husband's success will affect your life as much as his. If you undermine him, if you criticize him, if you don't cooperate and he becomes a failure, then that will help determine the house that you live in and the clothes that you wear and the vacations you take. His success, is your success, and you need to be a part of it. You as his wife will hear things that no one is supposed to hear. You will know his heartbeat. You will know his fears. And you can get around to the ladies in your church and you can confide in them of things that should not have been told. And they will repeat it, and quite often they repeat it incorrectly. They add to, they take away. And then you wonder why your husband has no respect in his church. And it's because of you. There are things that you do not tell that are supposed to be in confidence. Never tell things that are personal about you and your husband. The intimacy of your family should forever remain private. Your private life is indeed your private life. Not only that, if there's other areas of your family that should be kept totally private. You have a child that you have a little problem in the bedwetting area, and that's a private. Don't embarrass and disgrace that child. Talk to one of the ladies in church, and then she tells it at home, and her kids pick up on it. And the next thing you know, your child comes home weeping and crying because the children at the church are ridiculing your child. There's some things you learn to keep quiet. Poor grades, struggle to make grades at school. Who knows? Maybe they're a late bloomer. They'll come along after a while. Just don't tell some of those things. Learn to be private. The children are part of your ministry. You will be measured by your leadership of your children. And that's a shame. You should never set your child up as an example. Never say, well, now, your boy ought to be more like my boy. Don't do that, because when you set him up as an example, then he's also set up to be shot down. They have the right then to criticize him and to find fault. So don't set him up. He's not the example. God's the example. Give your children your time. There's been the question, should you give them quality time or quantity time? You cannot give quality time without quantity time. You can't say this hour is real quality, so I'll give them a little of it. And another time, it's not quality. But time is quality time, and you need to spend time with your children. Let them know that they're important. Take an annual vacation. Listen to your children. Let them talk. Listen to them and talk to your children. Let them become a part of the family. Let them know that you really love them and appreciate them. Realize that an honest mistake won't destroy your children. So one time you scolded them when they didn't need it. Maybe something happened and you thought they were guilty and you got on their case and you just landed into them. Hey, you're not a failure as a parent. You're a human. And you just give them enough love and you can lead them. They forgive awfully easy. In fact, they forgive really easy. So that won't destroy them. Do the best. Be an example. Be a saint and live for God. Pray in front of them. Read your Bible in front of them. Witness to people in front of them. Give an offering in front of them. Do everything that you want them to do. Become everything that you want them to become. Make a sacrifice for your children. Give them good schooling. Give them music lessons. Buy a piano. buy a saxophone, buy a trumpet. Let them take music lessons. Let them learn to play the drums. Take them to the music instructor. Invest in your children. You will be the recipient of all of their victories and all of their blessings. Oh, hallelujah. Teach them to clean the house. Give them responsibility. And teach them to dress proper. They can dress in tennies and torn blue jeans when they're playing basketball and baseball, going fishing. When they go to church, dress them like they're going to church. Let them know that there's a place that they should respect. Now, there's a lot of information that's available on the family unit. There are some good books. And again, I've mentioned books several times. I think that you should have 3 or 4 books on several topics. The budget, the family relationship, counseling, disciplining, etc. And you need to mix those up. You can read one and then later read another. You say, well, I've read one, but you need to constantly be refreshing and getting something new into your mind. Always something new. And reading and adding to your bit of knowledge and information. I have a little poem. I guess it's a poem. It's a little saying. Written by Daniel F. Roth. R-O-T-H. It's titled 20 Don'ts for Young Preachers. And from my experience, I would say that this is more important than the 20 do's. A lot of folks know what to do, but they don't realize that it's the negatives that are so damaging. So 20 don'ts for young pastors. Don't live beyond your income. Don't be a stingy person. Don't preach your doubts. Don't preach so much against things as for principles. Don't be tempted on any occasion not to preach your best. Don't be looking for a larger field or another call. Don't be a pessimist. Don't deal in off-color stories. Don't lose your temper in public. Don't overlook the Bible when looking for a preaching text. Don't be jealous of your fellow ministers. Don't scold or deal in personalities. Don't be artificial or sensational. Don't belittle little things. Don't be lazy. Don't neglect the sick and sorrowing. Don't betray a confidence. Don't fail to keep your appointments. Don't allow anyone to dictate your message. Don't fail to pray. Tremendous list, and I've elaborated on most of those. Now you're a preacher. You get in the pulpit, it's time to communicate. You want to be well informed. You want to project yourself well with confidence. You prepare and you preach a sermon. You preach 4, 5, 6 sermons. Now you're preaching one night, and as you're preaching, your memory is engaged, and you remember an incident that you did not study specifically for tonight, for this message. But it's so meaningful. It fits in. It is so appropriate. And now you're going to refer to it. You're not really sure what book of the Bible. You're not sure what chapter. You're not sure the name of the key person. You don't remember how long it took. You don't remember how many were killed. You just remember that a man had a battle and God gave a victory. And that's good. But the more specific you can be, the more impact your preaching will have on those that are listening. I have a list of things that I'm going to specify now. I'm going to name them. And for a serious preacher candidate, they will prepare to do a quiz on these following subjects. And I would even recommend that in an interview that the board ask for some, if not all of these things. Number 1, you should be prepared to write a 12-line sermon outline for an evangelistic message. At least a 12-line sermon outline, not many more than 12, so that it's easy to handle. You should be prepared to write a 12-line sermon outline for discipling or a message to the saints, the congregation. You need to be able to quickly write an 8-line sermon outline for a funeral. Perhaps one for an unsaved deceased and one for a saved deceased. You need to be able to sit down and by memory write an outline of a service so that you can hand it to an assistant and they can MC a church service based on your outline. They know what you want. What are you going to say when you are a guest minister at another man's church and some member says, "Give me your address"? What are you going to say? Name the title and author of a recently read book besides the required reading according to the manual. But a book of your choice, title and author. When did you last listen to a tape of your preaching in a critical perspective? Quote Acts 2:38, Acts 2:39, Genesis 1:1, Acts 2:4, Acts 4:12, Acts 8:15, 16, 17, Acts 10, verses 44, 45, 46, 47, and 48, Acts 19, verses 1 through 6, John 3:16, and 1 John 3:16, St. John 7, verses 37, 38, 39, the 23rd Psalm, Matthew 28:19, Isaiah 9:6, Luke 24, 46 through 49, 1 Timothy 3:16. That's just a little beginning, but you need to commit those to memory because in time, when you're preaching, you will refer to those verses. There will be others, and perhaps I should give you more, but let's get you started somewhere. Memorize them, word for word. Be able to sit down and write and put the correct pronunciation, correct markings, commas, periods, etc. Now, you should commit to memory these. The 9 gifts of the Spirit, or perhaps I should say the 9 parts of the gift of the Spirit, chapter and verse. The names of the 12 original apostles as recorded in Matthew 10, verses 2 through 4. Name the 12 tribes of Israel, understanding that there were eventually 13, including Levi. Name the 3 categories of sin in 1 John 2:16. And closely related to that, name the 3 temptations of Christ and his response. Name the 12 commandments. You should be prepared to give the name of the book and the chapter, which is the primary reference to the steps of apostasy. You should be prepared, upon request, to pray an effective public prayer. You should be able to comment on the error of the doctrine of unconditional eternal security. You should be able to define in some definition what constitutes a cult. It is important to know that. Explain the difference between the 2 words, revelation and illumination. You should be prepared to respond to why don't we worship on Saturday? Why do we worship on Sunday instead of keeping Saturday as the Sabbath? There are 4 biblical situations that allow speaking in tongues. And you need to know what those 4 guidelines or situations are. What are the 2 kinds of rules that every organization will have? Written and unwritten. Address the subject of justification by faith and clearly state the meaning of justification by faith without giving away the form. What is the who's who of faith? Book and chapter. What book and chapter records the prayer of Jesus? Special note, we're not talking about the traditional Lord's Prayer. That's not his prayer. That's our prayer. You should memorize the books of the Bible. You should be prepared to respond if someone asks you to give the books of the Old Testament, the books of the New Testament, Genesis through Revelation. You should be prepared to tell how many books in the Old Testament, how many books in the New Testament. And there is a general division of the books of the Bible, and you should know what the Pauline epistles, non-Pauline epistles, prophecy, Pentateuch, etc. You should be familiar with your Bible, and it's something you should read on a regular basis. We have gone through some of the high points of what we call FPA, Future Preachers of America. It is not exhaustive, and the reason that I call this FPA 1 is because that I knew when I was finished that there would be some suggestions. I want to say, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And I would be happy to receive any suggestions, because already we're putting together a little format for FPA 2. And we hope to have 6 tapes on the subject of Future Preachers of America 2. And we will elaborate a little more extensively on some of the things that we've touched on in FPA 1. And we will add to that. And we hope that this will be a great blessing to you in your effort to become an able minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. May the Lord bless you.